Hello, hello. Anybody there? Saúl?
Yes. How are you?
Oh, good, good. I just realized earlier this morning when I started doing the interviews that this is Easter, and I apologize if you had any plans for Easter. But here we are.
Yeah, I also realized that when I scheduled. When was it? When we so I'm a teacher during the school, so when they were like, "Yeah, we're off on Friday," and I was like, "Oh, that's right, it's Easter weekend."
Like, oh man, time flies. So listen, man. Yeah, I'm really excited to get to talk to you today because I feel like there's such gravity to your poetry. I had the pleasure of reading some of your poems, just kind of to get a sense of where you're coming from, and I was just very much floored by your perspective, your voice, and I'm really excited to get to know you a little bit today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. So you're in Texas, is that right?
That is correct. I'm in San Antonio, Texas.
Has that always been home for you?
No, this has not always been home for me.
Okay. Can you tell me about that a little bit? Where does family come from?
Sure. So my father is from San Luis Potosí, Mexico,
Okay.
uh, the state and the city. And then my mother is also from San Luis Potosí, the state, but she's from a small town called Salitrios.
Okay. You guys are neighbors. My family's from Jalisco down there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, pretty close. I think we've gone through there a couple of times heading down to see family. There's so much history there that you're able to convey in some of your poems, and of course I know that you've written a whole bunch of them, and I only got to read a couple of them, but the ones that I read from your website just left me feeling like there was just this deep connection with family, as there is with many Mexican families, and um there's almost a brutality to that counters the beauty of what you're saying. Like I can't explain it, but there's a duality there. Do you feel that way about your poems? Or I guess I should ask you, how do you feel about your poems?
Yeah.
Your voice.
So I really like that perspective that you put a brutality to it because I do see it that way too. I see it almost as retrieving history,
Mm,
but at the same time, sort of a violence to it.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And as you said, with most Mexican families, it's hard when you're trying to trace not only lineage, but also trying to figure out why why immigrate, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then in the sense of that, also realizing your different perspectives of identity and where you fall into place within, society in general.
Right. You had this, I have to quote this moment, and this whole poem like kind of broke my heart a little bit, where you wrote in the poem called "For My Queer Ancestors."
Oh yeah.
There's so many moments of heartbreak in that moment, but you said, "If you can read this, I'm losing myself." I
Hmm.
sat with that phrase, that moment, and I know that you were speaking perhaps specifically about identity, right? Perhaps gender identity, but I felt that in terms of the family that I am leaving behind, or that left me behind, and now we are so far removed that there is a disconnection there, and you don't know if you'll be able to find it back, or if you're just kind of grappling with that, and that's the one that kind of stuck with me, in the midst of all these awesome things that you had there. How has poetry helped you reconcile with some of this grief that you've experienced in your life? Because from the narratives that you've shared with us in your poems, yeah, I guess I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah. So thank you for pointing that out. And again, thank you for those amazing comments that you're making about my poems. As a writer, it's always difficult to to really let your poems out there
Yeah.
and see if they will connect with audiences. So I'm glad my poetry is doing that. So thank you for that.
Mm.
And going to grief, I actually didn't know I was writing about grief or trying to mend that relationship or heal in any sort of way. It wasn't until I want to say 2018, 2019,
Mm.
when I actually realized like this is what I'm trying to do. And I realized that very early on when I was doing a workshop with one of my really good friends who's in the writing community, Jesus Peña or
Mm.
JJ Peña.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, this is what you're trying to do. You're trying to figure out your grief. You're trying to move beyond it, but you have to write it out in order for that to happen. And that's when I kind of took a step back and I was really processing everything. And I also see a therapist. I was telling my therapist at the time, like, is this what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
She was like, you know, I don't have the answers for you, but it seems like unconsciously you already know. So you just need to dive in deep. And when it comes to writing about grief, you know, it can be triggering. It can be quite exhausting
Mm-hmm.
just because you are revisiting moments, you are revisiting time. You know, you kind of have to set up a whole ritual in order to start writing about these moments again and, you know, hopefully in a way or so try and get past them.
Mm. So when you were younger, did you speak Spanish or write in Spanish, or were you primarily learning in English when you were a kid?
I was actually in bilingual classes all the way up until 5th grade.
Oh, okay.
So I was both writing and reading in both English and Spanish.
Did you feel a connection to Spanish at that point, or did English become the default for you?
You know, this is so I got my master's in fine arts and creative writing at UTEP in El
Hmm.
Paso,
Uh-huh.
and it is a bilingual program.
Oh, great.
And a lot of the times I was very taken back because I started realizing that English is my dominant tongue.
Yeah,
And although Spanish is my mother tongue, I am not dominant in it. So it was a lot of relearning.
I see. Yeah. Does family still speak Spanish then, like when you were growing up, or
Yes. Yes. I still function as a translator at times.
right, right. I'm sure there's some poems about that, and I figured I may write some about translating a whole bunch. But isn't it interesting that it kind of becomes your part of your personality,
It does.
where you have to, yeah, it's like los viles. You got to translate los viles, or
Yep. Los biles, las cartas, todo.
so. Would you say that early on you decided you were going to be a writer or a poet, or was this something that you started developing later on, or you started finding this creative language later on in life?
You know, this is a really good question because I've been asked this a couple of times, and a lot of people don't know that I was actually raised as a Jehovah's Witness,
Oh, wow.
and we were very dedicated to the church for about 18 years.
Mm,
I knew that I did not want to be part of the church or be in it. So as a young kid, I've always started just creating these crazy stories in my head of escape. And now that I'm older, I know that that's kind of trauma.
wow.
um, but I never actually wrote in paper until about, I would say, my undergrad. That's when I realized that this is what I wanted to do. This is what I was passionate about. I wanted to write.
And what were you studying in undergrad? Was it writing or was it something else?
So I actually started my undergrad as a biology major because I wanted to go into pharmacy school.
Hmm.
And then 2 years after that, I quickly figured out that even though I was doing well, it wasn't for me. And and I actually took one gap year, and
Mm.
then I decided to major in English.
What happened in that gap year? Like what kind of life happened there?
It was just trying to figure myself out, trying to see what I wanted to do with my life, where I wanted to go. Um,
Yeah.
just just figuring it out. Yeah.
Right, right. So at the end of undergrad, then you said, you know what, this is me. This is this is who I'm coming into the world as a writer. And from that point on, did you focus specifically in poetry, or were you still looking at the wider picture of writing?
I was still looking at the wider picture of writing. It was actually in I have this professor who I'm still very grateful to be in contact with him. His name is Dr. Mejia. He's teaches at Texas State,
Mm,
and it was my last year of undergrad, and I took Mexican American literature with him,
mm,
and that's when I started realizing that there were narratives out there like mine, and that's what pushed me to begin writing, to start exploring these narratives.
mm,
Specifically, I gravitated more towards poetry because we did read a couple poetry books, including Lorianne Guerrero, who is also from San Antonio. And she actually came to our class during undergrad and did a visit and a reading. And I was just so moved by her and her experiences being also from San Antonio and the South Side. And I was like, this is what I'm going to try and do. Like, here we go.
yeah. What does Texas and specifically the places where you were raised, how does that inform your poetry?
Sure. So the place where I specifically was raised in Texas is San Antonio, and I'm from the South Side. So pura Mexicanada, la raza, like
Pura raza
everyone,
por allá.
sí, pura raza, everyone's here. A lot of first generations, a lot of firsts for many things, right? And this is my barrio. This is what I'm called to. This is the type of narrative that I want to share with everyone. Share the experiences that I've gone through, and hopefully, my end goal is that I am able to connect with the audience and that they feel the things that I've also felt. But most importantly, to be seen. I feel like that's one of the things that I've always wanted to be seen.
Mm,
And I do write about this a lot in my poetry as well.
yeah. I love a sense of place in poetry, and especially for me, I'm a Mexican raised in Wyoming. So we moved from Mexico when I was 10 years old, and I've been in the cowboy state for a long time now. And it feels like for a lot of years I was just kind of an island of Latinidad, or like I needed a little bit more Mexicanada in my life.
Right.
And so now it feels like I'm doing a little bit of catch up. So I love that you had that built-in community that could back you up in a way. Can you give me a moment when your poetry helped you connect with your community specifically, like a moment or an experience where you felt like that worked?
Yeah. So I talk a lot about being a first generation American and also finding identity. I feel that coming into terms with my queerness,
Mm,
specifically, in the Latinx community, it can still be taken in so many ways by family.
yeah.
I've known friends who, unfortunately their family has shut them down,
Mm,
others who, are still working through it, and then ultimately, acceptance.
yeah.
And when I did come out, it was a very hard experience for me just because I didn't know how my family was going to take it.
Yeah.
But luckily, being in this area, in this part of the city, I was able to find queer spaces at that time for support.
Mm.
And one of my favorite places will always be the Original Saint, which was a club. But oh my God, you just would walk in there and you would feel like you belonged.
Mm.
You see people like you, bodies like yours. And, it was just an amazing community and amazing space.
Oh, that's absolutely great to hear. Was there distance for a time between you and your family, when you came out to them?
There was some distance. I specifically with my mother, I feel like for
Mm.
her was kind of taken aback just because, mothers are supposed to know everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she was shocked by the news. And it took her some time to fully accept it. But, we're in a good place now. And she loves me and accepts me. And, I love her as well.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's really good to hear. So when did you write your I guess you had the poem At Night My Body Waits, and then now you have the chapbook. But that poem, has it been around for a little while?
It has, yes. I actually wrote that poem in grad school,
Okay.
and then it's been through multiple revisions. And in fact, the version that's going to be in the chapbook is a different version.
Oh, I see.
It's a different form, I should say, than the one that was published by the normal school.
Okay. So how is the original poem in informing the collection?
So a big part of it is the collection for the chapbook does also talks about moment of grief, moments of trauma, and identity. And I feel like this poem is the center point for all that, of
Mm,
when all this begins unraveling.
okay.
It's like pulling the thread off the shirt
Yeah.
and everything coming undone.
So how long has it taken to put together the poetry collection in the way that you want to see it?
Sure. So the poetry collection has taken me a bit to put everything together. I am a very slow writer. I tend to write one poem and then I let it simmer for about 6 months to a year.
Mhm.
And then I go back and revisit it. And then there are some other poems, that just need to come out of you, and those are done fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I am a slow writer. So putting together this chapbook has taken me about perhaps around a year.
Okay.
And then I am currently finishing up the full collection.
Mm, wonderful. Has it been um has it been tedious to go back and recollect? Given that these poems have a lot of emotional weight in your personal life, is this something that you have to take breaks from? Is that why you feel like you need to let them sit for a while?
Yeah, so it is very tedious. It's tedious, in the way of organizing, in the way of writing it out, in the way of revisiting moments. And I also tend to ask my family questions.
Mm,
So in a way, I feel like we're all writing this together.
I see.
And sometimes when I do ask questions, they also need time to think about, what happened back then
Right.
or what happened through this experience.
Yeah.
And it has taken time, and it's like I said earlier, I do have my rituals where, I the day before I sit down and write, I do everything that I love, go get my favorite ice cream, listen to my favorite songs, take a long walk, put on my my sleep sounds,
Oh yeah.
light my favorite candle, and then, because I know it's coming, right? So you have
Yeah.
to do self-care before and after as well.
Oh, that's beautiful. I had not realized the beauty of ritual, right? And how it allows you to empower yourself when tackling something like this. But out of the ones that you've written, do you recall a poem that after you wrote it that were you frightened by a poem? Have you been frightened by your own poem and you said, I can't say this, I can't vocalize this, even though it's here in front of me? What
Right.
yeah, what was it, or when did it happen and what did you do?
So I'm going to be completely honest. The poem that did that for me was Meditation on Grief,
Mm,
and Oyster River's Pages published it. When I first wrote that one went through about, I want to say 15 or 20 revisions
okay.
until it got to the last part. And for me, that's when I realized my poetry is not only about grief, but it's also haunting in a way.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, ooh, I got like the chills and I had to step back and I was like, is this what I'm writing? A frightening narrative?
Yeah.
And then after that, I just realized like, wow, like this is what I'm doing. Like I'm in a way still haunted by these memories, and it's just going to be a haunting full collection of poetry.
Right. So do you consider that like a high bar where you say that's the feeling that I had before and I need to replicate it with every poem? Or is every poem different for you? Does it not have
every
to subscribe to that?
Yeah, every poem's different. I would say they all do have some type of haunting aspect to it,
Mm,
but each poem wants to be its own thing. I as the writer can't force the poem to be something that it doesn't want to be. In a way, the poem takes on its own identity as well, and I
mm,
have to allow it and give it the space to do that.
yeah. Are there poems that defy revision where you say, this was just a moment of complete exorcism, right? Or something that where it just kind of manifests itself in a way that like you look at it and you say, I can't improve on this, even if like you step away from it, I can't see it any other way than what it is.
Right. Yes, definitely. There's been poems like that. And I call those the easier poems because those are the poems that I, can write like within a day,
Uh-huh.
perhaps, maybe even a week, a month. And then they stay like that because that's what they want to be. And
Mm-hmm.
a perfect example of that would be Notes on Sueñitos
Uh-huh.
that was published in Cherry Tree. That one came out and, I tried to revise it and it just said, nope, nope.
This is who I am. This is how
I
I'm gonna
am.
roll.
Yep.
No, that's incredible. I always feel like there's eureka moments, right? That just kind of completely blindside you, and then you end up with something that it is what it is. So that's super interesting. Now, for this collection, um, is this one already out or is it about to come out? At Night My Body Waits.
This chapbook is coming out this September, I believe.
Okay,
Um, it won the 2021 prize for chapbook contest with two Sylvia Press.
nice.
And
Felicidades, by the way.
thank you. And the biggest shocker for me is that Victoria Chang was the one who selected it. And
Wow.
I cannot get over that. Like I'm still processing her reading my words, just reading in general, like not even selecting it as a winner, I'm a huge fan of her. So just
Yeah.
that I'm starstruck by it.
What is it about her work that draws you in?
So Victoria Chang also writes about grief and her one of her books, Orbit. Oh my God, it's just so amazing the different views that one is able to take when grieving, and she just did such an amazing job at it.
Mm.
That was the first book I read from her, and it just pulled me in instantly. I became a huge fan of hers.
Oh,
And
that's
then with Dear Memory, she also plays so much with images and letters, and it's something that I'm like, wow, like this is what poetry can do,
mm,
and go even beyond like trying to tell a story, but like connecting you fully. You're just fully invested in the narrative.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm actually really happy that I'm doing this for National Poetry Month because the beauty of this for me is that I get to learn about poets that, and I'm a student of poetry. I didn't go to school for poetry or anything like that. So I'm very much taking in all of these recommendations. And now my reading lists are amazing because we have like these awesome, inspiring creatives that are just out there that you wouldn't otherwise find unless you were in this world of poetry. But are you still the managing editor for Borderlands, the Texas Poetry Review?
Unfortunately, I'm the former managing editor now.
You're the
Yes.
former. Oh, okay. So, can you tell me about that experience, during your time there, what you picked up along the way being an editor?
Oh, I loved it. I loved my team that I worked with. I love reading submissions. I loved finding new voices, putting together everything, sending acceptances. One as a writer, we're always waiting for a submission to say yes, right, or no. But it's one thing that made me realize is empowering voices and seeing who's out there,
Mm.
and relating to a lot of the poetry as well.
So, just help me out with the hierarchy here. Does managing editor have the final say on stuff, or how does that work in this particular operation?
Sure. So I believe every journal is a little bit different. Sometimes the editor in chief is the one who makes the last call.
Mm.
But specifically for Borderlands, I was the one who said what was going to be the last call.
Mm.
So what we would do is, if we have over 300 submissions, I send a portion, divide them equally, and send them to my editors, and then they send them to their readers, and then they all read. And then after that, we all join together in a meeting via Zoom.
Mm.
And then we'd start deciding, okay, which ones were the ones that we were most called to. This is the time that I like to call fight for the voices.
Uh,
And we fight for the poems that we want to include in coming volumes.
I see. I see. So, how long does it usually take to put together a publication or a volume? Like in
So, yeah, so because we were putting it together during COVID and there was a lot of, setbacks, this one took about a year to put together.
mm,
Usually without, before COVID, it would take about 6 months or so to put it together.
oh, I see. So COVID kind of threw a wrench into stuff.
Yes, COVID was a big one in the literary world.
Mm. And you're an educator too, right? So how does that affect you as an educator on a day-to-day basis? Are you still dealing with COVID things right now?
We are. I teach at a high school, and we're currently still, trying to implement as many as the CDC guidelines. Students are still required to wear masks. We're required to wear masks. Unfortunately, the classroom spaces are a little bit too small,
Mm,
so we can't have everyone 6 feet apart. We try,
yeah.
but everyone does have a specific seating chart just in order to trace back contact tracing.
Mm. What's the biggest challenge right now for you as an educator?
Oof, that's a big one. It would be time right now. I feel that many literary writers or writers in general who are in the education field, specifically in public schools, we struggle with time
Mm,
because we want to write. We want to, I wish I could dedicate a whole afternoon to writing or a whole day, but a lot of the times because we're tired and
yeah,
exhausted,
right,
we have to really manage our time and, decide where we want to invest our energies into.
right. So when you do get a chance to get some writing done, when does that happen for you?
It's usually at night and it's about maybe 1 or 2 hours.
Mm,
And I don't have a specific writing schedule just because with my job, I can't foresee, I should be more disciplined. That's what I should do. But sometimes, a nap is more important
absolutely.
for the body.
Never count
Uh,
out the nap.
yes, but I'm also a writer who writes by lines. And what I mean by that is I could be, walking and then I just hear a voice in my head with the line.
Mm,
And then I
I see.
write it down in my phone. And then, by the end of the week, by the end of the month, I just have all these different types of lines in my phone. And then I just start bringing them out and I rewrite them into my notebook.
Mm,
And then for my notebook, they start, some of them start telling me like, hey, like we want to be together, or
I
maybe
see.
these 5 lines wants to start making a poem. And then that's how I start creating my poetry.
Oh, I love that. It's something that I'm a playwright and dramatic writing kind of guy, theater guy, and I've always thought that the process of gathering like that is the most fun challenge of them all where you just
Yes.
have pieces, right? It's not
Yeah.
about a cohesive thing. You just have a couple of things that draw your attention, like you have the tree that you saw on your walk, and then you have the story of the person from your family or whatever. And then after you collect a couple, it's like some things just belong together. And then the
Right.
challenge is to really make them fit in that world, right? Into that
Yes.
little
Exactly.
frame. Yeah. I absolutely love that. Are there challenges to that? Like where you
Oh
feel like
yeah.
do you get overwhelmed where you just have too many things that don't fit?
I do get overwhelmed sometimes because I'm like, why doesn't this one work? And it's because maybe the story doesn't want to fit in with the lines.
Mhm.
And another thing is, I could have one really good line that I'm like so moved by it. I really want it to work, but the one line isn't there. There's no connecting or links to the poem in general or what it wants to be. So I have to get rid of those, and I save them for later. I do have a notebook that, where I cross out lines that I use and then lines that I still have that I can go into like my line bank and choose lines out of there.
Yeah. So right now, where are you getting your poetry from? Like, do you have any favorite literary journals or magazines that you frequent?
Yes, a droid journal is one that I frequent often.
Mm,
Split Lit is another one that I frequent often. And I want to say those two have been the ones that I've been visiting the most.
mm,
And then writers in general. Right now, I'm reading a couple different writers that I'm inspired by, and then the new writers and that I also want to read their collections.
Mm.
And I don't sit and read a whole collection at a time. I let them linger, kind of like my own writing process.
Yeah, yeah.
And I read like one or two poems from one book, and I'm like, oh, this was very fooling and satisfying.
Mm.
And then I grab another book, and I may read one or two poems, and again reflect and process what I just read, and then move to another one and do the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we get saturated like by poetry when we read a whole collection in one sitting?
I don't think so. I think it just depends on the type of reader that you are
Mm.
and how you want to not visualize, how you want to take it in. I feel like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's if it's one poetry collection that I'm really excited about, I will sit there and read it. For example, Ocean Vuong's new poetry collection, Time is a Mother.
Mm.
I still haven't sat down to read it because I want to make sure I have the time and the space that I want to dedicate to it. So I haven't touched it yet. But
Mm.
then I have other books that I'm like, okay, I can read one or two poems a day from here, and then, read another one or two from here.
I see.
It's about the experience.
Yeah, I guess it's much like food, right? Where sometimes you want the dessert, something that will
Yes,
satiate, and then other times you just want the three-course meal, right?
I definitely.
So you being an educator, do you have any moments in your teaching life where a student has taught you something that you've applied to your work outside of education?
Oh yes, a lot of times. I've been teaching now in public education for about 4 years now.
Mm.
And every single year, I feel like I learn something different from my students. And specifically this year, coming back from a pandemic and being in the classroom, a lot of my students are teaching me patience.
Mm.
And, they're just like, Mr. Hernandez or Sir, just you got to be patient. And it's like, you're right. I do have to be patient.
Mm.
Or don't get angry at yourself. We're coming back from a pandemic. And it's like those things that I have to hear just to be like, they're right. Like, this too. Like, why are you acting funny? It's just those type of things or situations where it's like we have to be patient with ourselves, and
Yeah.
that's a big lesson I feel that I've learned this year.
That's pretty remarkable to hear given how the newer younger generations are always getting flack for having no attention span, right? Where
Right.
they're telling you, "Oh, well, they're all on TikTok and they're doing all kinds of stuff over there and they don't have a patience to operate the way that we do or that we used to." But
Mhm.
their world is a lot newer and faster. Do you think that poetry has a place in this new world that is digital, that is faster, that is more immediate and visual than anything we've ever had before?
Oh, definitely. I feel that poetry does have a place, and I'll say specifically just because of social media platforms. Growing up in the 90s and early 2000s,
Mhm.
as platforms like Twitter, Instagram, even Tumblr before Tumblr, wasn't as hot anymore.
Yeah.
But these spaces didn't exist, so it was very hard to kind of connect. Going back to being seen or wanting to be seen, or even hearing about other people or writers. It was definitely difficult. Living in this today now, like I am just so surprised of how quickly you can access Twitter and have access
Yeah.
to so many literary individuals, so many writers, and then the most exciting part is you can tweet them and they'll tweet back to you.
Do you feel that sense of community on Twitter?
Oh,
Like there's
yes.
support there, like genuine support?
Yes, I do. And I know this is strange because it's kind of like AOL chat, like you trying to connect with people back when it was a thing, like
Yeah.
going into these AOL chat rooms and just like trying to, see what's happening and see if you can make friends. I
Mm.
feel like it's a sort of way like that. Like there's writers that I've never met in my life other than our interactions on Twitter. And then there are some writers that I've met through Twitter that I met in real life, and it's like, oh my god, yes, like we're cool, we're friends.
Right,
I
right.
do feel the genuine support, and one of my goals is hopefully to meet a lot of the writers that I do interact with on Twitter in real life.
Mm. No, that's amazing. There's something to be said about that community. And for some of us, community is a little bit hard to come by in some places, but with Twitter and the internet, I mean, everything's just so easy now that all you got to do is reach out, right? And just
Yeah.
extend a hand out into the darkness and say, hey, I would like to participate too. I would
Right.
like to be a part of it. Can you tell me about the writer's workshop? It was the MACONDO writer's workshop.
Yeah, so Macondo is here
MACONDO.
based in it's based in San Antonio,
Mhm.
and Sandra Cisneros actually created Macondo and
Oh,
founded
yeah.
it.
Yeah, okay.
And she gave a space to Latinx individuals in order for them to have a space to be seen, have a space to write, and it is still up and running. So I was able to participate in it, and I found community there as well. I am still very good friends with a lot of the writers who I've met during that workshop, and it was just such a beautiful experience. I really just was wowed by everything.
So for, say, somebody who's starting out in the poetry arena and they want to get a sense of how to collaborate with somebody, how to bring people into the fold, what are some things that you would recommend to somebody who's just starting out?
I would recommend finding your writers on Twitter. I'm serious about this because I'm always terrified of just reaching out in general. Well, my Mexicanada, I'm always afraid to reach out and ask for help.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
I feel like that's just a very Latinx thing, like the sense of prideness.
Right.
Um, but I've gotten over that fear because writers are so, we want to help, we want to create community.
Yeah.
We want to let you know that you're seen, that your voice matters. And the quickest way to do that is, send me an email, send me a tweet.
Mm.
I will gladly reach out back to you. And there's more than hundreds of writers in the Twitter world, in the literary community, that will do the same.
Hmm. Right. No, I think that's great to see, and hopefully we'll be able to continue this awesome stuff we got going on in the poetry community. It's one of the friendlier places I've ever been to on the internet, so that's it's still a surprise. You reminded me with the Mexicanada comment there of something that I've tried to kind of make sense of in my writing, and I apologize I didn't bring this up sooner because we're going all
Oh,
over the
you're fine.
place. This
Yes.
podcast, we just go back and forth in time. But talking about machismo in Mexican culture, Latinx culture, is there a way to reconcile that? Like, do you feel like you have reconciled those things in who you are as a person? Because I feel like it's so pervasive in the
Mhm.
way like we Mexicans kind of live life, and the definition of being a man is just so ingrained in our culture. Do you feel like at this point in time in your life you have removed yourself from that, or do we even have to remove ourselves from that?
Whew, that's a tough question because, you know, as much as I would love to say like this part isn't in me anymore, it's there in minimal parts.
Mm,
It's something I feel that is so engraved within the Mexicanada culture
mhm,
that you have to be always aware. And when I do say something or do something that's, within that toxic masculinity, I quickly just like pause myself, take it back, and apologize because I'm like, oh, I didn't know I was doing this. I apologize. Like
mhm,
I'm still, processing. I'm still learning how to, be more aware and live in the awareness, live in the now,
yeah,
to be able to stop myself from saying comments or just, acting out of place.
yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate that because, like I said, I have one idea of how things are. And
Right.
obviously, Wyoming is so weird because it's like the reddest state ever. I'm sure Texas obviously is up there for sure, but it feels like that's one discussion that I just really want to ask every Mexican person that I come upon, because it's tough to remove yourself from that, or to say, do I have enough checks and balances in myself
Right.
to monitor that? Or am I just like ignoring what the world is telling me?
Right.
Do you feel like in your community that's an issue, like where you're at in San Antonio?
Yes and no. I feel like this is an issue that's everywhere, to be quite frank.
Yeah.
I feel that it just ties back to spaces and where we decide to move, right? To well, not move
Mm,
like physically get up and move, but like navigate. What type of spaces are we navigating? Where are we choosing to spend time at?
right.
And this is the issue because, as a person who is used to just survival, 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 we have adapted and we have, trained ourselves to quickly navigate these spaces, but also navigate identity.
Mm,
And I feel like at the end of the day, it is part of the survival culture, but also like we need to be aware of the spaces that we're in
mhm.
and what we're saying, because ultimately, if we want change to happen, but we're still partaking in it, then, change is really not happening. And there have been moments where I'm able to educate my family and like, this is why we don't say this, or this is why
Mm,
we don't push that anymore because we're trying
yeah.
to change. And a big one of those is like women's place within the Latinx community, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, you're supposed to be a mother. You stay at home, make sure that clothes is washed, food's ready, things like that. And it's something that with my own sister that I try to tell my parents, hey, like we're living in this type of world now. Her place isn't just at home. Like
Mm.
she's able to do so much. She's an individual. She has potential to do all these amazing things as a male can.
Wow, that's super interesting. You reminded me of more family stuff, so we'll have to talk about that next time. Um, Two more questions for you because I want to respect your time here. But if you could let your younger self know something about how things turned out, words of comfort, words of encouragement, as an artist or as a human being, what would you say to your younger self?
Wow. A little emotional there.
Sorry. I get really emotional at the end of these things. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. That's something that I've been reflecting on a lot lately. I feel that I'm not always giving myself enough credit where credit should be.
Mm,
But I don't know. I would tell my younger self, hey, like you don't have to hide as much anymore. Like you're seen and, that they're going to survive. Yeah.
mm. And lastly, what have what has writing, what has crafting poetry, speaking your truth, what has it done for your quality of life up until this point?
It's giving me a voice. And I will say that both metaphorically and physically. Growing up again in religion that is very cult based, not culture, cult based. We were always, be quiet, be silent, only talk when you're spoken to, things like that. And, as a child and even as a teen, I was always very quiet and silent. And now that with my writing, I was able to kind of liberate that and in a sense also heal the past me. And now as an adult in their early 30s, I can happily say that I speak now and I have a voice and I don't stay quiet. And, I fight for the things that I want. And I also am sharing narratives that hopefully connect with my audience and, they also feel seen at the end.
Beautiful. Well said, well put. And I think that about does it. So, Saul, thank you so much for your honesty, for your courage to do this, because I can imagine that at any point in time that wasn't easy. And I really hope that I can keep an eye out on what you're doing, and I hope to keep up with you. If you have anything else going on in the creative realm, please feel free to let me know. And I just am really thankful for your time and for your writing.
Thank you so much. No, thank you for giving me this space and this time as well. And I've had a really good conversation with you, and hopefully we can do this again.
Anytime. Thanks again, Saúl.
Thank
Cuídate.
Igualmente.
Have a good Easter.
Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you later, and you take care.
Thank you as well.
Bye.